Thank you for everybody who's joining us, who's in person over at Tacit, and everybody who's joining us online, and even those who I know are going to be watching the recording. We are excited to be partnering with Kantor and Kantor. We have partnered in the past, and we have really, truly appreciated our partnership with them. So today we are here with Andrew Kantor, who is a senior partner at Kantor and Kantor LLP, where he represents individuals in disability, life, and long-term care insurance matters. He focuses his practice on long-term disability claims, including administrative appeals and IRSA litigations, and has extensive experience helping clients navigate insurance denials. Andrew also handles cases involving mental health related claims and insurance bad faith. He regularly speaks on these topics, helping individuals, families better understand their rights and options when facing complex insurance challenges. So without further ado, I'd love to hand it over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Becca. Let's make sure I'm sharing my screen properly. There we go. I can do this. Can you all see the PowerPoint
Yes.
Yes.
and only the PowerPoint, nothing else? Not my
Yes.
face or anything? Okay, great. All right. So thank you, Becca, for that lovely introduction, and thank you to all of you for taking an hour on your Thursday night to be here with me, listening to me talk. Some say the nicest thing you can do for a lawyer is give him 45 minutes to talk uninterrupted. So I really appreciate all of that from you. As Becca said, my name is Andrew Kantor. I'm the senior and managing partner of Kantor and Kantor. As I was also saying, Kantor and Kantor are my parents, Glenn and Lisa, and they're sailing off into retirement. So I'm taking over the firm as they do that. Um, so a little bit about me, as Becca said, I mean, to put it simply, I sue insurance companies when they deny claims that they're not supposed to deny. That's my pretty much entire practice is suing insurance companies in that way. A big part of my practice is long-term disability denials. Basically fighting with insurance companies who don't pay short and long-term disability claims. Um, I've found in my career that the one of the things I enjoy most and frankly found most impactful positively on the universe was the free consultations I would give as an associate, and I still give to this day. 95% of people who call me don't need me, and the help I can give them in 10 or 20 minutes can relieve so much anxiety and frustration from this process. So I started doing webinars like this because it's like 10, 20, 50 consultations all in one. And I really enjoy doing them, so I appreciate you giving me the chance to chat with you a little bit. um, I am barred in California, DC, and in a few weeks, once I find a friendly judge to swear me in Washington as well. I'm very excited about that. I really like the laws here. I really like Washington for a lot of reasons. It's good like California, and I'll explain a little bit of that, a little bit why in a little bit. I also like to point out, especially when I'm talking to Nami, that I speak from a place of understanding in that, I can consider you all kindred spirits. I've had my own mental health struggles. I've had family members with mental health struggles. And I'd say just about every single one of my clients who is either disabled or dealing with, or is primarily disabled, is in some way suffering from mental health issues as a result. So I appreciate the chance to get to speak to you all. And at the end of the presentation, I will give you my contact information. If there is anything that I don't cover, or if you have questions after the fact, you can feel free to shoot me an email. Give me a little bit of time to respond because we're particularly busy right now, but I'll always get back to you if you shoot me an email. So today, what we're going to talk about are disability benefits generally, and as they apply to mental health claims, and how to make a mental health disability claim, and what's involved, and what some of the pitfalls can be. So there's a few types of disability benefits. When I talk about disability in this context, I'm talking about the inability to work. And I'm talking about the inability to work despite reasonable accommodations. You might immediately ask, what is a reasonable accommodation? That's a discussion for another slide and another day. But the concept is that you really can't work without getting the accommodations that a reasonable employer would provide you under reasonable circumstances. There's a few main sources of disability benefits of which you should be aware. The most popular and well-known and most widespread is Social Security disability insurance, also known as SSDI. It's provided by the federal government. It is paid for by your taxes. You usually have to work at least roughly 5 years to earn enough to qualify for SSDI, and the amount you qualify for depends on how long you've been working and how much you earn. And I'll talk more about each of these as I go through the presentation. Um, the next one is private, what I call private short-term and long-term disability insurance. That's just like health insurance, usually provided from your employer. It's a standard employee benefit that a lot of employers offer these days. Um, most of you can also purchase long-term disability insurance through a broker, the same way you can purchase life insurance or anything else. That's usually for higher earners because it's pretty expensive. So most of the people who actually have it are getting it through their employer. And I'll talk more about that as well. Um, Also in Washington, you have paid family medical leave, which is something unique to the state of Washington. I'm not going to talk about that too much because from what I understand, it's similar to California state disability, where all you really need to do is file your claim, have someone support it, and it pretty much gets paid. Any problems that arise are usually because of your employer rather than the state of Washington, which is good news when you're dealing with a state. So first, I'll talk a little bit about Social Security disability. So when are you eligible or when should you apply for Social Security disability? If you expect to be disabled for at least a year, you don't have to expect to be disabled for at least a year, but that's kind of an automatic qualifier. If you know you're going to be out for at least a year, you can almost certainly jump in and qualify. Um, a lot of people don't know if they'll be out a year, but if you are sure you're unable to work at least for the near future, you should qualify if you pay the taxes. You have to work in a job covered by SSDI taxes. 95% of jobs are covered by SSDI taxes, not all of them. Some state jobs and government jobs do not pay into the SSDI system. If they don't, usually they'll pay into a government retirement system or disability retirement system to which you'll have access to. But make sure you know whether or not your job pays towards Social Security disability. Thankfully, most jobs, when they don't pay towards it, they'll tell you and they'll make it very clear and they'll highlight why. But of course, that's not always the case. Um, so you also have to meet the Social Security disability insurance definition of disability. It's a pretty stringent definition, but in the very simplest terms, it means the inability to work in any capacity, doing any job um, that or part-time or full-time, which could earn you $1,620 a month. So if you can't work full-time and the part-time work you could do would earn you $1,620 a month or less, you qualify for Social Security disability. If you get Social Security disability, the maximum benefit per month is $4,018 until Social Security retirement age, which varies depending on when you're born. It's something between age 65 and 67. And you can get an extra 50% on top of that if you have any dependents. That includes children under the age of 18 or dependent adults who are in your care. In order to get the process started, it's very easy to get the process started. You go online to ssa.gov, you put in some basic information, you create an account, and boom, your application is started. Unfortunately, that's where the easiness usually stops. It gets a lot more difficult from there. Most of the time, you will get denied initially. I think 92% of people are denied at the claim stage. So you'll be denied. Most likely. And then if you're denied, you can appeal and then you'll go to administrative law judge hearing. During this entire process, you will likely be subject to evaluations, either evaluations based on doctors not seeing you in person or in-person Social Security evaluations. Um, these evaluations can be either mental or physical, depending on what you're dealing with. But in the mental health context, you can expect it to be a pretty exhaustive psychiatric or psychological evaluation that drills down to allegedly objectively measure your impairments. Um, People have sometimes asked me how do you maximize your chance of success when it comes to these evaluations? And as far as I can tell from the Social Security lawyers I talk to, there is no way to do it other than get lucky or not get lucky. It really depends on the evaluator. It depends on the context and it depends on what kind of day the evaluator is having. Unfortunately, there's a lot more subjectivity to the system than there should be, which is why you hear a lot of people with really significant issues getting denied pretty regularly. And it's why Social Security lawyers exist. So yeah, the practical reality is it's really hard to get approved. Most people are denied at the claim stage, and unfortunately, appeals can take several years. I wrote that line initially in a presentation for the first time, I think 3 years ago, and it has not gotten better from there. The wait times have gotten longer. Uh, I'm going to avoid saying things controversial, but certain changes to the Social Security Administration have depleted resources and increased wait times. So while claims used to take maybe 1 to 3 years, now they're taking sometimes 2 to 5 through the appeals process. And for someone who that could potentially be their only source of income, that could be really devastating. Um, the closer you are to the Social Security retirement age, the better chance your SSDI claim is going to be approved. Especially if you're over 50, there's guidelines which give a higher chance of being approved once you hit that age. There are rumors of a new Social Security approval, which is supposed to remove that benefit for older people, basically making it harder for older people to get approved. Apparently, as of a few weeks ago, that was shelved, or at least it got so stale that they stopped moving it forward in the regulatory procedure. So thankfully, I could probably remove that from the presentation. But I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that the current administration is not entirely friendly towards disability benefits, towards Social Security, towards the entire process. Um, People sometimes also ask me, like, are there genuine concerns about the Social Security administrator or Social Security system drying up, like Social Security disability? From my understanding, no. The way the system is funded, that at least in the short term, there would have to be pretty significant congressional action to do that, and everyone considers it political poison. So thankfully, it looks like Social Security is not going to be touched, at least not by this administration, but who knows what's going to happen in the future. If your SSCI claim is denied, I strongly recommend hiring a Social Security attorney. Their fees are capped by statute, so they can only take a percentage of what your back benefits are. Um, and usually, it's almost impossible to get your denial overturned without one. The system ironically has it set up that way sometimes, which I think is extraordinarily unfair. But if things were fair, lawyers wouldn't need to exist at all. But we do. So that's Social Security. So separate from the Social Security disability system is short-term and long-term disability insurance from an insurance company. Through companies like Hartford, Unum, Prudential, Principal, Mass Mutual, MetLife. You again, as I said before, you usually get it from your employer, but you can also purchase it individually. People sometimes ask me, how do I know if I have it? Easiest way to know is to ask your employer. You can also look at your pay stubs. Your pay stubs should show deductions for short-term and long-term disability insurance. Um, One thing that's important to know, especially when you first start a job or are looking for a job which gives you long-term disability insurance, is unlike health insurance where pre-existing condition exclusions no longer exist, they still exist in disability insurance. What this means is if you get a job and then you file for disability within a year or two of getting that coverage, they can look back to see the 3 months before you got the coverage. And if you had the same condition that's disabling you, they'll deny the claim entirely. This is uniquely problematic for people with mental health issues, I find, because often people will get treatment for years, have stable treatment for years, then something will happen to exacerbate their condition, completely, almost entirely unrelated to what they're dealing with before, but the insurance company will call it pre-existing. One famous case that comes to mind is famous to me is someone with pretty mild anxiety who had anxiety 15 years. It never bothered them at work. They saw their psychiatrist every year to check in on their on the prescriptions they had. And then they were in a hijacking, a carjacking. They were carjacked with them and their daughter, and she got horrific PTSD. And had never had anything like that before. And the insurance company called it pre-existing because she had basic anxiety. Um, so we overturned that case. Thankfully, it was noteworthy and unique. But that's the kind of issues that you deal with mental health conditions. So if you're aware that you're getting this coverage, make sure you know what kind of treatment you've gotten leading up to the coverage date, or when you're filing your claim. So short-term and long-term disability usually pays you based on a percentage of your salary, usually 60% of your salary. It'll reduce, what you get will be reduced by Social Security disability and paid family medical leave, and other sources of disability income. Um, Policies are very different. It's very important that if you get this insurance, you look at your policy. One of the most important things to look at is whether it's an own occupation only or an any occupation policy. Some policies will pay you if you are unable to do your own job. That's called the own occupation standard. Um, and they'll only pay you that way for 2 years, and then they'll change to a more difficult any occupation standard. Having the own occupation benefits is really helpful. If you're a surgeon and you break your finger, you will always get paid under own occupation benefits, but not any occupation because you could probably do a different job other than be a surgeon. Um, so that's one big difference in these policies. Another thing that ends up being, oops, sorry, you want to go backwards. That I'll talk about in a little bit that because I'm talking about policies is one of the worst things about long-term disability are mental health limitations in disability policies. Many policies will only pay you 2 years of benefits for mental health related disabilities instead of paying you to Social Security retirement age. This means someone with a chronic mental health condition basically gets 2 years of benefits, and the younger you are when you become disabled, the worse off you end up being. And that can be really devastating to people who end up having chronic conditions, especially chronic mental health conditions that get significantly worse. Um, so, how disability claims generally are evaluated? One is they will look at the medical evidence. This starts with your medical records, your psychiatric records, and your therapy records. One obstacle that people confront pretty often is that their therapist will sometimes refuse to provide their therapy notes. That's completely fine. If they do that, what you can ask them for instead is a summary treatment note, just a summary treatment letter, a letter describing your treatment, what kind of treatment you received, and their general opinion about your ability to work. They don't have to disclose anything personal or private or confidential. They only need to disclose the things that are related to your disability. Um, Psychiatric records are usually more accessible because it involves medication management. So psychiatrists are usually required to give the records and don't have the same ability to withhold them. Um, I strongly recommend if you're considering filing a disability claim to request your own medical records. I understand therapists might be even less inclined to give you your therapy records than they would give a lawyer or a doctor requesting on your behalf. But again, ask them for that summary treatment letter and explain what it's for. Usually they can tailor the summary treatment letter as to not to be triggering to you based on your situation. Um, a doctor support is probably the most important aspect of any disability claim. If you do not have a doctor, psychiatrist, or therapist, psychiatrist is usually required. Um, Arguing why you're unable to work, it's going to be very hard for you to get any momentum for your claim. It's the first stop has to be getting psychiatric and psychological support. Um, some people ask, how do I know if my doctor will support my disability claim? Well, usually, if you're at the point where you're considering not working, usually your mental health professional has probably said something to you about that. And if not, what you do is just have the conversation, explain what's going on, explain why your condition has worsened, and explain why you don't think you can work. Um, and usually they'll explain to you why they'll be able to help, or if they're not able to help, and do think you can work. That's not the end of the story. What you can often do is try whatever they suggest. If your therapist says, "Oh, I think you can work if you try these things," try them. And then if they still don't work, then your therapist or psychiatrist should probably be a lot more convinced that you're not able to do your job. Um, Make sure they're focusing on functionality and the specifics of whether or not you're able to work. There's 95% of what a therapist or psychiatrist is looking at or discussing with you has nothing to do with your ability to work. It has nothing to do with your medical, and which has nothing to do with your medical treatment. So it's very normal for a doctor to have records full of support, but not enough specificity because they don't think I need to document exactly why this person can't work. Because why would you, right? Unless the doctor knows you're dealing with a disability claim, why would they bother? So sometimes you have to ask your mental health professional to be specific. Like, what is it about your mental health issue that prevents you from being able to work? If it's anxiety, are you unable to interact with people? If it's depression, are you unable to get to your job in the first place? I mean, there's a wide range of things that could impact your ability to work. You just have to make sure they're very specific about it. So when you file a disability claim, especially a long-term disability claim, what's going to happen is there's going to be a reviewer. So when it comes to long-term disability, there will be a doctor called a peer reviewer who will review all of your medical records and then try to conjure up a report arguing why you're not able to work. They'll often send their report directly to your mental health professional and ask them to comment on it or argue. There's not much you can do to prevent this. The one thing I recommend is to make sure your mental health professional knows you are filing a claim and make sure they know to be aware of these random phone calls and to know that it makes the most sense to ask them to put it in writing And if they do respond in writing, make sure they're responding in a way that's supportive, and that documents your disability. Um, you also may be sent to an independent medical exam with a psychiatrist. These are becoming rarer in the long-term disability context and more common in the Social Security context. You usually have the right to ask if a nurse or a nurse observer or family member can be present. So you don't have to be in the room alone with a random doctor you never met. Um, Usually the best course of action is just to be as honest as possible. Often these exams are a setup for denial. So I often recommend if you're being sent to one, talk to a long-term disability or Social Security lawyer because they'll be able to kind of walk you through what's about to happen based on who's giving you the exam. Um, so there are certain special issues that kind of arise in all mental health related claims. I'll kind of walk through them with you. So mental health claims are treated differently because they're assumed to be harder to prove in that, if you have a broken leg, arguably you can see it on an X-ray. If you've got a bulging disc, you can see it on an MRI. If you have MS, you can see a lesion. From an insurance company's perspective, they say anybody could just say they're depressed if they want to game the system. That's also some of the justifications for having the 2-year mental health limitations. We all know this is not entirely true. There's lots of testing that can prove someone's impaired from a mental health condition. But the reality is they're treated with a lot of scrutiny. They will look at your social media. They may do surveillance on you. So, and it doesn't mean you can't do anything. It just means you have to be honest about what you're doing. If you're saying some days you're great and you feel like 100%, and then other days you're horrible, don't be afraid to be okay on 100% on a good day. But if you tell them you're in bed every single day and they see you out on a given day, it's going to sink your claim. So you have to be really careful about that. As I mentioned before, there are 24-month limitations in long-term disability policies. It's really important to look at them carefully because there's a few different versions of them. Some of them are fightable. Some of them have really big carve outs. Some of them are really problematic. So if you're in a situation where you're on long-term disability, and you're curious if your disability will go beyond the 24 months, I would talk to a long-term disability lawyer, especially if you have physical issues as well, because that's one of the things that lawyers like me fight over all the time. Um, Even if there's not mental health limitations explicitly, there may be something called a subjective symptom limitation, which effectively does the same thing, except it also extends to physical conditions. So any mental health condition or physical condition which can't be proven, they'll call it a subjective symptom limitation and only pay you 2 years. So it's really important to know if these limitations are in your policy before you make your claim, so you kind of know how to maneuver yourself and what to be arguing. Um, so why mental health claims are denied, some common reasons that I see that people, some pitfalls people fall into. So it's really important to see a psychiatrist. I understand that you can have devastating mental health issues and only be seeing a psychologist, but usually from the Social Security Administration's perspective, um, and the disability insurance perspective, if your condition is not severe enough to see a psychiatrist, it's probably not severe enough to be disabling. And again, I don't agree with that logic, but that's kind of the logic you can expect them to see. Often the same logic applies to medication itself. Unless a psychiatrist has made a very explicit explanation, and argument as to why you shouldn't be on any medication, the Social Security Administration and insurance companies will most usually say if there's not the need for medication, the condition's not severe enough. So keep that in mind when you're making decisions about your care. You should always put your care first before a disability claim, but there's certain realities that everyone has to face, when deciding what to do. Um, One thing I see a lot is an insurance company or SSA will deny because they say there's been no referrals to higher levels of care, like intensive outpatient, or even inpatient treatment. There's no reason you have to go to intensive outpatient patient or inpatient in order to qualify for disability benefits. But what can often be helpful is at least the discussion of it. There's a million reasons why it's not good for someone to go into IOP. If I mean, no matter how severe they are, it's not right for everyone. But often, at least having that discussion about why you're not making that decision, or what's going to happen before you escalate to a higher level of care, the discussion itself often indicates a level of severity, which that lack of discussion doesn't indicate. So I would strongly suggest if you're considering filing a disability claim, at least talk to your mental health professional what the plan is to potentially escalate you to higher levels of care if you get to that point. Um, Also, make sure you're getting frequent treatment. It's a really ironic problem where often people with mental health issues don't get treatment regularly because of their mental health issues. The Social Security Administration and insurance companies will often use that against you and say, if you were really ill, you'd be getting regular treatment. Make sure you're getting frequent treatment, seeing someone as often as possible. The more frequently you're getting treatment, often the more compelling your claim looks to the Social Security Administration or an insurance company. Um, Inconsistent activity, as I mentioned before, the insurance companies, not the Social Security Administration, but insurance companies will investigate your activity. In the olden days, they used to stick someone in a van and take pictures of you and videotape you. They still do that every so often. But right now, the big thing is social media. They will be all over your social media. They will see everything you do on social media. And anything they find which is inconsistent with your disability, they will use against you. And unfortunately, it does not take a lot. And it doesn't take you doing anything inconsistent with your disability um, in order for it to really be used against you. They say, I never drive, and they catch you driving for 10 minutes, even though driving has nothing to do with your disability. If your credibility goes out the window, usually so does your claim, unfortunately. So make sure you're honest with them about your activity and whatever you are doing, especially if, usually your mental health professionals are telling you to do things, right? Telling you to get out of the house, telling you to go to the park, telling you to get exercise. Um, Make sure you're doing the things your doctor says you should be doing. Um, and being honest about it. Insufficient documentation, make sure that your doctors are willing to fill out the forms that are requested of you by the Social Security Administration and insurance companies, and make sure your medical records are complete. You do not have a right usually to have opinions in your medical records changed, but if something's factually inaccurate, you have a right under HIPAA to change it. So you can always just ask your doctor to change it if there's something factually inaccurate. And when it comes to insurance companies and I think the Social Security Administration, there's an inherent bias um, where they're looking for reasons to deny claims, and the Social Security Administration is not looking for reasons to pay them. So keep in mind that even if your disability is obvious to you and obvious to everyone around you and obvious to me, you still should be in a kind of a posture in your head where you feel like you have to prove your case, because unfortunately you do. So, talking about long-term disability again a little bit specifically and the laws behind it. Um, so, long-term disability is denied a lot, especially mental health claims. If your claim is denied, one of the first things you should do is request a copy of your claim file in writing. You have a right to it whenever your claim is denied or in any way there's any adverse decision made. Um, when you were denied, there will likely be an appeal letter, a deadline in the appeal, in the denial letter for which you need to appeal, usually 180 days. That's a very important deadline. So if mark that deadline on your calendar and do not miss it if you have a denied claim. As I mentioned before, you're going to want to gather medical records, gather doctor statements in response to the denial, and try to gather more supported evidence. One thing that can be really helpful is statements from friends, family, and even coworkers who saw you struggling before you went off work. Um, Even if insurance companies don't always find it persuasive, I find that federal judges do. If you get to litigation, a judge reading a statement from your spouse or even your child about how hard you've been fighting to work, the cold, heartless insurance company may not care, but a lot of judges do. So it's really important. Um, Consider a consultation with an LTD lawyer like me. There's a lot of really good ones. So I'm not totally biased. There's a great one named Jeremy Bordelon, who's in Oregon and Washington. You can call him too if you ever need one. But Google's usually a good way to find a good lawyer for either Social Security or long-term disability. I recommend looking at Google reviews. I'll make sure there's a lot of them and make sure they go back a long time and make sure they're current. Because that's usually a pretty good indicator of whether a client's happy with a law firm. Um, so ERISA is the federal law that governs most of long-term disability. And why does this matter? ERISA is evil. It's one of the worst laws that could possibly be on the books. And you don't really know why unless you're an ERISA nerd like me, or you eventually face the wrath of an insurance company and have your claim denied. Um, what ERISA does basically is it makes it so that when an insurance company denies your claim, the worst thing that happens to them is they have to pay the claim anyway and a little bit of attorney's fees. So there's no punishment for them financially for denying a claim. This is also why health insurance is so screwed up in America because 60% of people have health insurance covered by ERISA. So it creates a system where basically, like, imagine if the penalty for robbing a bank was if you got caught, you had to pay the bank back with interest. Like, why not rob a bank 10 times? You get away with it three times, you're rich. So that's what the system that's been created with insurance companies. So what happens is they deny claims with impunity. I mean, they just deny claims all over the place. They deny claims for ridiculous reasons. They deny claims without shame. They deny claims eagerly. And, you can put that on record. I don't think that's too controversial. And it's not because the people necessarily who work at insurance companies are evil. It's because insurance companies are monolithic, um, valueless entities, and the law makes it so that they make certain financial decisions. And until the law is fixed, disability benefits won't be fixed. But there's certain important things to know is that if you have an ERISA claim, make sure to file your appeal on time because if you don't file your appeal on time, you can waive your right to file a lawsuit, which is not something you want to do. Also important to know is that the only evidence a judge will see is the evidence you submit during your appeal to the insurance company. There's no discovery, there's no depositions. So it can be really important to hire a long-term disability lawyer to handle your appeal because that's the only time you get an evidence and we know what evidence may need to get submitted. Um, so ERISA governs your policy if you get your policy through your employer and your employer is not a government entity and your employer is not a religious organization. Um, if your employer is one of those things, your claim is not governed by ERISA and instead governed by Washington state law. Washington state law is excellent because it provides really good remedies against an evil insurance company who denies your claim. There's two main sources of law that you can use against an insurance company. One is common law insurance bad faith. You've probably all heard of this. Basically, when an insurance company denies a claim wrongfully, you can go after them for the damages they cause and maybe even punitive damages, which is the judge basically issuing a multiplier to dissuade their bad conduct. The Insurance Fair Conduct Act is a special act in Washington which allows you to file suit alongside insurance bad faith. It's a special Washington statute where you can get treble damages, which basically means separate from the punitive damages, you can get your actual damages tripled, which is a really good statute because punitive damages are very rare and actual damages are really common, especially with people with mental health issues, because one of the most common damages in a disability claim is emotional distress. And imagine how much emotional distress someone would go through who has a mental health claim that's been wrongfully denied. So not only do they have mental health issues, but they're also dealing with a denied disability claim. So there's can be significant damages in a case like this, which is also one reason why ERISA claims are denied a lot more frequently and claims covered by state law are denied a lot more rarely because insurance companies, especially those in Washington, usually know better. Not always, but usually. So a few examples of just general insurance bad faith include ignoring medical evidence, what we love to call cherry picking, where you'll submit 50 pages of medical records, 48 pages of them highlight just why you can't do your job. There might be one page of medical records which says you're occasionally able to walk your dog, and then they'll just talk about how you can walk your dog, and that means you can, be a full-time CEO or a full-time executive, right? That's what we call cherry picking. They'll often misrepresent policy terms. Especially when it comes to the mental health limitations. And they love to use doctors who work for them in order to make the decisions on your claim. So go figure. Internal employees are obviously going to make decisions in order to support their employer. Um, as I said before, why this is important. It's important to know if you're filing these claims, what law your claim is governed by, so you understand the context of how your claim is going to be treated. If you have an ERISA claim, it's going to be treated a lot differently than if your claim is governed by state law, and you should act accordingly. Um, and there's a lot of different things that are involved with that, but mostly it involves being very careful when you're dealing with an ERISA claim because if something goes wrong, there's no possible good outcome other than you having to go through a painful litigation process with a difficult insurance company. So for people who can't continue to work and you're considering filing a disability claim, a few tips. One is to try the accommodation process first. I know it's not always possible to try the accommodation process, depending on what's going on. And it may not be successful. You may ask and they may say no. They may give you accommodations that you don't think you can do, but trying them it boosts your credibility, and it also undermines the insurance company or social security argument that had you asked for the accommodations, they would have accommodated you, and thus you're not disabled. So I strongly recommend trying accommodations in some form, or at least engaging in the interactive process before filing a disability claim. Um, as I kind of mentioned before, make sure your psychiatrist and therapist are supportive of the disability claim, and documents the support in your medical records. Um, if your doctor isn't supportive, and you know you can't continue to work, you can try finding another doctor. I know it's hard advice to receive. As I said before, you can, if your doctor has suggestions of what you can do and you're willing to try them, I suggest trying them. But I've seen a lot of situations where, mental health professionals and claimants are just not on the same page about whether someone should continue working. And claimants, to me, are in the best position as to know whether or not you should be working, even better than your mental health professional. Um, the biggest one is don't be a superhero. And superheroes come in many shapes and forms, but they're a lot more common than you think. So many people go to their physicians, their mental health professionals, and just naturally undermine what they're going through. They will, they won't repeat certain symptoms. They will underplay the severity of things. They won't share things that are particularly embarrassing. Ironically, people won't share their biggest work screw ups or work problems because they're uniquely embarrassing. It is so human nature, and I say this from a place of total empathy because I have my own mental health professional who I see, who over at times I've regretted not saying things to because I've been embarrassed. I totally get it, but in these disability claims, it can really bite you because what the insurance companies are often looking for is those contemporaneous medical records and exactly what you're saying at the time. Um, so make sure you're sharing everything, you're sharing all the details. And if you have a relationship with a mental health professional that allows emails, take advantage of that. I've seen some claimants where they're kind of explaining to their psychiatrist what they're dealing with in between the sessions, and that can be so helpful. Also consider a diary or a log of your symptoms, what you're dealing with, how frequently you deal with it. That can be really helpful as well. So the last thing I'll kind of finish up with is a little bit of guidance for family members and support networks. So often I'm talking to family members, and not the claimant themselves. And that's a wonderful thing when it's available. And how hard it can be for family members to be dealing with this. So as a family member or part of the support network, it can be really helpful if you can help with documentation. If you get authorization to request medical records or to sometimes communicate with a psychiatrist or mental health professional just for the purpose of authorizing records or getting the records or requesting the letters, that can be really helpful. These claims can be really administratively burdensome. And the last thing a lot of people with mental health issues who can't work want to be dealing with is administrative nonsense. Like, I think we can all understand how difficult that can be. And often having a spouse or family member around to help with that can be an absolute game changer. Just as it comes to the documentation and making sure you meet deadlines. We all know how easy it is to let deadlines fall through the cracks, especially as they pile up. So that can be really helpful. Encourage treatment consistency. I know this can be difficult, but it's really important that treatment is sought and it's sought regularly. Building that record is really important for any disability claim. Um, Attend appointments. This goes along with treatment consistency, but make sure you're attending your appointments. You, from my perspective, Zoom and remote treatment is just as good as in-person treatment. We are in the future. I don't care what the insurance company thinks. I mean, it's different. We're not talking if we're not talking about physical ailments or things that require examination of your body. When we're talking about psychiatric and psychological care, Zoom is just as good as in person. And I love that because I know how much easier it is sometimes for people to get that treatment if they just have to go to their desk to get it rather than driving to a physician's office or a mental health professional's office. So embrace remote treatment, and don't let an insurance company or SSA use it against you. That doesn't mean you shouldn't see them in person every so often because that can often build kind of credibility through the medical record. But Zoom is great for that purpose. Um, be an advocate. This kind of goes along with don't be a superhero, but feel comfortable to fight for your loved one. To understand the system they're dealing with. to know how hard it is to deal for them and to push back. Um, these insurance companies will often tell you things that are objectively false, not necessarily because they're trying to, just because they're so poorly trained. And the system is so complex that you will often know better after just doing a little bit of research, especially after talking to me and asking me any questions, because we always know that we know more than the insurance companies do. So make sure that you feel confident in working with these insurance companies and the Social Security Administration, and don't let them uh, push you around or make you feel like you're not in a position to help because you absolutely are. And I can tell you, family members have on many occasions made the difference when it comes to getting disability claims approved. So, and that's all I've got. I've got, if anybody has, thank you for your time, of course. This is my contact information. I'll leave it up here because it's, and you can copy it down. If anybody has any questions now, I am more than happy to answer them. I don't know, Becca, how do you want to do this I don't, let me, via the chat, or if people just want to jump in? If
Yeah,
anybody happens to have any questions.
people are more than welcome just to, if you're online, come off mute or drop it in the chat. And if you're in person, if you can just come up to the camera so we could hear you better. But
I equip them with microphones and the speakers close to the computer. So if they have any questions, they can go ahead and just ask. I had a question. I'm sorry to kind
Yeah,
of
kick it
butt in
off.
here. Okay. So I don't know how like personal like these questions can get, and also not trying to start controversy.
I love
But
controversy.
okay, great. I'm glad you do, Andrew, because this is a little controversial.
Go
So
for it.
I know that in January of 2027, the Big Beautiful Bill is taking effect with the Medicaid work requirement. I'm pretty sure that's federal. I don't know all the like exact specifics. So I have a sister who has been living in a group home since 2023. And she's doing great. She's in a group home. She's stabilized. She receives medication. But of course, her initial disability claim has been denied. So we're in the process of trying to see if we can get that appealed, like seeing, just seeing what the next steps are. In the meantime, her housing and her care is being funded by Medicaid. So when that like change happens in 2027, I am a little concerned that well, obviously she can't meet the work requirement or the volunteer requirement. So I'm a bit concerned that she is going to kind of get kicked out. I did read parts of the bill, and they were a little ambiguous about people living in group homes and about mental illness. So I guess what I wanted is your opinion on like if you're anticipating a huge change with that, and like what maybe we could do to expedite the process before that January 1st date. Because I'm in a position where I'm like measuring my living room to see if like a bed can fit there for her in January.
Well, first, the from my understanding with challenging a statute like this, the challenge can't come forth until there's a plaintiff, and there can't be a plaintiff until someone is negatively impacted by it. Especially with this, so basically, I think if there's going to be a legal challenge, it'll happen in 2027. Um,
Right.
any legal challenge to this setup would delay this whole thing by years. Um, that's one of the great things about legal challenges. So my
Right.
hope, and I don't fully understand how they plan to implement this and how they plan to track it and how they plan to adjudicate it either.
Right.
Here's the thing with the big beautiful bill, and if that's a controversial part, yeah, yeah, we'll talk about that. But
That was,
uh,
yeah.
yeah, no, it was not a bill written with a lot of thought.
Yep.
And that part especially has a significant political undertone. It wasn't done to actually fix any problem. It was done as like a middle finger to people who appear to be gaming the system, who really aren't. It was really a political thing, with this whole myth that people are out there gaming the system, and that's why we have $40 trillion in debt, which is crazy. Um,
Right.
I don't know. I don't know the answer. Normally there would be a lot more discussion about a bill like this before it came to fruition. It would go through committees. There would be like groups that would be able to comment on it, lawyer groups, but they kind of just fired this thing through.
Mhm.
So the one on one hand, it means that there's going to be a lot less that I can actually or anyone can say about how it's actually going to work. On the other hand, there's
Okay.
probably a much bigger chance that it does get challenged somehow, or they find such massive problems with it that they can't implement it the way they hope.
Okay.
Um, God, I wish I had better answers for you, but
No, no, that's okay.
yeah.
Because I attempted to read it myself. I thought it was supposed to take effect in July of this year. So I
Mm,
was kind of planning for that. I don't know if it got pushed back or what happened, or if there was some kind of process where I don't know. But I know it's happening in 2027. But I tried to read it to like see if there was any specification on like people in group homes or people living with mental illness. And like it was so ambiguous. And here's the thing is like I want to trust the government when it comes to mental
mm,
health stuff, but so far historically, I mean, the crisis system that I've experienced has been a catastrophic failure. So I'm not trusting them to really make the best decisions and have these clauses available for, hey, if someone's in a group home with schizophrenia, let's continue Medicaid, you know?
yeah.
So yeah, I don't have a lot of trust in it. And I'm just worried that January 2nd, my sister's going to be on the streets, and without her medication also. So yeah, it's just been a very
Mm.
challenging time for us to try to plan ahead.
Yeah. No, I imagine. And you know, I I wonder if the how, I'm very curious what kind of process they're going to implement in order to fight this. Because I mean, this is like a another setup for disability lawyers to get involved because we're arguing about who can and can't work and why.
Right.
Um, and I don't know if they're going to do that to the Social Security Administration. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's really troublesome because there's a whole group of people now that fall perfectly through the cracks, and my sister is one of those people. And
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot more of, people like her that are just going to kind of be in that weird, ambiguous area. But
Yeah.
but I still appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I have a question. Well, actually,
Yeah,
I have two questions.
sure.
So first question, I know you mentioned the timeline has been extended from the 1 to 2 years to I think maybe you said 3 to 5. Is that specific to California or is that what we're seeing across all 50 states?
That's a really good question. So when I said that, it was more of a very general nationwide, like the time has gotten longer. Um,
Okay.
that's a really good point to bring up. The actual wait times will absolutely vary by county, because
Okay.
each county has its own administrative law judge assignments. So
Hmm.
it varies. You used to be able to ask your Social Security office what the average wait time was for a hearing. I don't know if you can still do that. And my expectation would probably be that California does take longer than Washington, especially because I'm in LA. But from what I
Okay.
understand, nationwide, it's wherever you are, it's taking longer than it did before.
Okay. And then my second question, I know you mentioned, and a lot of people mention getting um, a disability lawyer to help them with their case. I'm someone who just applied for disability, just got denied, but I'm kind of in this special area where I passed the bar and then became too disabled to work. So I'm
Mm.
wondering, is it's simple enough for a newly barred attorney to navigate, or would you still suggest hiring a disability lawyer?
Absolutely hire a disability lawyer. And here's why. Not because I don't think you can do it, is because the better of a job you do representing yourself,
The
the
worse it
more,
is for my case.
right, the more they'll
Hmm.
argue you can work. So like you almost
Okay.
have to not do a good job in order to prove the case. So I would definitely hire a Social Security lawyer.
Which I very well might do a bad job, so.
Well,
Okay.
and I mean, in some ways, there's never a better advocate for you than yourself. But
Yeah.
it's a very uh,
It's a catch
difficult
22.
process. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's a catch 22, exactly.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
You're very welcome.
Andrew, I have a question
Yes.
regarding practitioners. You've said a lot about psychiatrists, but if a patient is going to a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner or a PA, is the psychiatrist considered the higher level of care?
No, a really as long as they're experienced and they're involved in your care, a psychiatric NP or someone at that level is usually absolutely fine. Um, I'd have to do a little research to see how the Social Security Administration looks at that, but I know for a fact that I'd much rather have a supportive record from a an NP than an unsupportive or skimp record from a psychiatrist. If you had the choice, maybe a psychiatrist is better, but it's absolutely fine if that's who your treatment's with, especially because it's often easier to get access to someone like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, in the role of family members, if you have a family member who has been denied, but their disability is severe enough that they're not able to manage this process themselves, it's the disability, they can't read or document or, do those things for themselves at a competent level that it would help. Is that a situation where you want to look into like power of attorney? If you have a power of attorney, in that situation, can you do this process with a disability lawyer for them? I mean, like, what does that look like?
So you so that's a great question. So you don't need a power of attorney to work with a lawyer on someone's behalf. All you need is that person to talk to the lawyer and say, "Hey, I authorize, my family member to help me with this." They can sign a document or even an email often is fine from my perspective as long as they confirm it. Um, and that's good enough to just work with a lawyer. A power of attorney automatically does the same thing. So if you're to come to a lawyer with a power of attorney, it automatically gives you the power to communicate with this person on their behalf, and the lawyer just wouldn't need that email. The power of attorney is usually a good thing to have generally. It can sometimes take a little bit of time to complete, and sometimes you need, depending on the state you're in and the county, it can cost a little bit of money. But for the most part, you definitely don't need it to work with a lawyer for a disability claim, but it helps.
All right, thank you so much.
Well, is that good questions? Let's take three solid questions any day. Anyone else have any questions?
We had a question, but we're having difficulty with the microphone.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay.
I hope somebody with their disability case, they have an attorney. They got SSDI, categorized as temporary. And then their social security went up because they were on Medicaid, also on Medicare Medicaid. And then because the social security went up, they got kicked off Medicaid. And now they can't go see counseling. So technically they're gonna, I think they do a check-in every 2 years. That's correct. How does that work? When you get SSDI, do they do a review every couple of years? What's the process? So now I can't go to counseling. So Medicare doesn't cover counseling. So we can't, when you were doing the presentation about continuing to go to your psychiatrist. Because the social security was with us, they can't use their Medicaid. So I'm just wondering if you've seen these kind of cases.
Where someone's kicked off of Medicaid before that Medicare kicks in for Social Security?
No, they had Medicaid, Medicare, but their Medicaid, because of the Social Security, the amount they were getting, disability pays, however that's categorized.
Oh.
Because we raised it above that, yeah.
Oh, the SSI?
200 over. And
Yeah.
I spent like a year talking to several agencies, nobody knew, and I finally figured it out. It's like, and I was like, can Social Security lower it so you can get back on Medicaid? Because then I can't go to counseling, and they're the ones that helped him, referred him to this lawyer to get on disability. So kind of like the system created another problem. So I don't know. It's like I was curious if we see this with some clients.
Yeah, no, I haven't really dealt with that before. Sounds tough though.
Following up on that, I was curious also, what would you advise a client? I mean, granted, this predicates that the client can even afford to come see you with a client who, because they are unable to work and they don't have the good coverage, they fall through the cracks, they can't afford to see a psychiatrist or a counselor, do that regular treatment. I mean, they're just disadvantaged by not being able to afford that. And they don't have something like familial support or people that are, catching that for them. What do you advise that person to do? Because they're kind of between a rock and a hard place.
All I can give is legal advice, and my legal advice is see a mental health professional to get your claim supported. And I understand the rock and the hard place, and I I have no answer for that. My answer should be like, you shouldn't be in this position. There should be no situation where someone who needs this care can't get it. Um, there are times where we are able to use that argument if someone has like gaps of treatment because they can't afford it for a few months and then they go back on. Like we can absolutely make that argument if we're in that position. Um, but the reality is, you're talking about someone, who maybe can never get access to the care in the first place, can never get to see a psychiatrist who can endorse their claim. Um, Sometimes in the social security system, you'll get lucky basically, and they'll send you to an evaluation, and the evaluation will be so supportive that they'll basically just grant the benefits. I find that to be very rare. And it's not the way you want to go about a claim. Um, yeah, it's not a problem I can fix. It's not something I can give advice for. It's do anything you can to get the care or treatment. And I wish I had more, but yeah. Valerie, do you have your hand up, it looks like?
Hi, yeah, I have a question. Thank you, first of all, for all this information and for what you do for people. Along with the idea of not looking basically when you're writing out the forms for, Social Security, disability, or you're doing a personal statement, do you have to be careful that, because I'm a writer, that's part of my job, so I'm a good writer, but I can't work more than 10 hours a week. So, but you have to be careful so that you're not sounding super professional and like you can work when you're writing letters and stuff.
I really like this question because, in fact, I've had a few appeals, not usually for Social Security, but for long-term disability, where the insurer has said you wrote a long and comprehensive appeal letter, thus that indicates you're not cognitively impaired and you can work. The easiest way to prevent that, in my opinion, is to put something in the statement saying, "My spouse helped me with this," or "This took me 3 weeks to do," or like
Oh,
actually describe how long the statement took you or who helped you with it. Or you can even say a lawyer helped you with it. We're talking, I'm helping you. You can say a lawyer helped you with it. Congratulations. And then you can basically write whatever you want, and they won't be able to use that against you. But it's a really wise concern, because in some situations, if you're arguing, for example, that you're unable to write and you're cognitively impaired, and you write a beautiful 30-page appeal letter, they might ask questions if you don't kind of explain how you got that 30-page appeal letter to look so beautiful, but you're still unable to be a writer, for example.
yeah, that's the whole thing. It's taken me months. So, and
I'm
how
sure.
long should a statement be? Do you have any recommendation?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question as well. I have seen statements that are 1 or 2 pages that are excellent. I have seen 15 pages page statements that are excellent. And I've seen the opposite, right? I find the page limit rarely is an indicator or a big factor to whether something's good or not. My advice when you're writing it is to write everything. Start by writing everything, get it all down, and then as you read through, you can cut the things that don't seem persuasive and bolster the things that you want to focus on and make sure everything lines up. But I would never worry that, oh, this is too long, I have to cut it down just because it's 20 pages. Or if you think you have a beautiful statement that's a page and a half or 2 pages, don't think, oh my God, it's only 2 pages. I've got to make this five, or it's not going to get anywhere done on anything done. So I focus on the
Oh,
content rather than how long it is.
okay. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I think it sounds like it. Well, I'll tell you, that's all the questions. My information is still up. I welcome questions. If anyone ever has them, I'm always available. I have a great intake team that keeps me organized and makes sure I see emails that I don't always see. Um, and so feel free to email me at any time. Becca, thank you again for having me. Always, again, you let me talk for like 45 minutes and answer questions. Lawyers never get to do that. We always get interrupted by judges or clients or someone. So I'm invigorated by that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we truly appreciate your partnership and all of the information that you have. And we also, for anybody who may be interested, we also have all of their information, business cards, as well as brochures of Kantor and Kantor in our office. So,
Brochures. We have brochures.
yeah, we also
Cool.
bring them out to tabling events. So,
Oh, great.
uh, yeah, we are happy to also connect. But again, yeah, his information's there. So we truly appreciate you spending this evening with us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all, and have a good evening.
You as well.
All right, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good
Bye.
night. Bye.